the time that has gone by, the one thing that we've learned is that diseases don't discriminate. बीमारियां भेदभाव नहीं करती. So the one chance, the biggest chance that we'll have to fight against it, to come, to win over any of these diseases that have come by, is to unite, to be together. And this song is just a note to that.
ढूंढदा फिरा नी मैं भागदा फिरा मैं नैया बेपरवाह बस खुद ही मेरी ढूंढदा फिरा सारियां दा रब रखा सारियां दा रब रखा सारियां दा रब रखा सारियां दा रब रखा नी मैं समझने लगा दिल भी धड़कने लगा नहीं मैं गलत रहा थोड़ी कदरें सीखी थोड़ा वक्त आया नहीं मैं गलत रहा अजय मैं नहीं बस खुद ही मेरी ढूंढदा फिरा सारियां दा रब रखा सारियां दा रब रखा रब रखा सारियां दा रब रखा
Thank you. One more song, which, to be honest, looking at the way the frontline workers and people who work in the medical, in the hygiene sector, you know, the way they've given their all to it, the one thing that we've really realized is that a few words of encouragement, they go a lot further than we think. थोड़ा सा प्यार से और उनको अगर सहराया जाए, उनको बताया जाए कि हम उनके कितने आभारी हैं, तो it can totally, I think it gives them the energy to keep pushing. This one is called Afzai, and this is a note to all the people who are working in the front line, you know, of hygiene and medical. This one goes out to all of those people.
तूने सोचा कि मैं कभी
उड़ी जाना है कर मेरी सोच ते यकीन तेरा शक पंखा ते विसी चली वे छोड़ घर तेरा चली मैं पाने आसमान हाँ उड़ चली वे देख मैं तो चली जा उड़ चली वे देख बादलों से पार मैं तो चली जा उड़ चली वे देख हाँ उड़ चली वे देख मैं तो चली जा उड़ चली वे देख लंबिया सांसा आसमान दरिया उड़ चली वे देख मेरी नजर कदे मिली कदे नहीं मेरी जुबान सुन के भी अनसुनी सी रही कहीं चली वे छोड़ कर तेरा चली वे तेरी मैं छोड़ के पाना हाँ उड़ चली वे देख मैं चलिया उड़ चली वे देख बादलों से पार मैं चलिया उड़ चली वे देख हाँ उड़ चली वे देख मैं चलिया उड़ चली वे देख लंबिया सांसा आसमान दरिया उड़ चली वे देख मिलिया मेरे साको तवनु आगना कदी किसी आसमां ते है होना उदा नाम भी कहे
Thank you.
Hello? Okay.
Fantastic.
Sanket,
Fantastic.
they're waiting for host to start the meeting.
All right. आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. बहुत ही सुंदर गीत. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. आप ऐसे ही गाते रहें. Jane Goodall is also with us. I would like to welcome Dr. Jane Goodall on One Health. This is a message: One Health, One Planet, One Future, and social equity and justice are key, and the youth is the hope for the future.
One and only Jane Goodall.
Jane Goodall.
COVID-19 pandemic has changed our world forever. It's caused so much suffering, loss of life, and economic chaos around the globe. And the tragedy is we brought it on ourselves by our absolute disrespect of animals and nature. We now know that animals are individuals who feel fear and pain. They're sentient beings. Yet we exploit them in cruel conditions in wildlife markets, factory farms, and so on, creating perfect opportunities for a pathogen such as the COVID-19 virus to spill over from an animal to a human. And it's the same disrespect of nature that's led to the twin disasters of climate change and biodiversity loss. It's absolutely vital that we develop a new and more sustainable relationship with the natural world, because we're part of it and we depend on it. But we depend on healthy ecosystems comprised of a complex interrelationship of plant and animal species, a wondrous tapestry of life. And as more and more species become extinct, so ecosystems sicken and may collapse. We must abandon the absurd idea that there can be unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources and a growing human population. There are well over 7 billion of us now. Probably it'll be closer to 10 billion in 2050. What'll happen if we carry on with business as usual? Already there are conflicts over access to water and land in some parts of the world. Already there are more and more climate refugees forced to leave their homes because changing conditions due to climate change mean they can no longer make a living there. And too often they're greeted, if they finally make it, with disrespect, discrimination, hostility. In this world full of conflict and suffering, my greatest hope is in young people. The Jane Goodall Institute's program for youth of all ages, Roots and Shoots, is already in some 65 countries. It encourages young people to take action to make the world a better place for people, animals, and the environment. They understand that nature is suffering, that we must find ways to protect forests and other ecosystems and clean up rivers and oceans. They understand the need to ban wildlife trafficking, to restore life to land poisoned by the use of agricultural chemicals, to eliminate factory farming and move towards a plant-based diet. They understand the importance of reducing the unsustainable lifestyles of the wealthy and alleviating poverty. They know that each one of us matters and makes a difference. And when millions of people make even small ethical choices in how they live every day, cumulatively, this moves us towards a better world. And the young people learn that far more important than the color of our skin, our language, culture, and religion is the fact that we're all part of one human family.
Now, Jane Goodall is on the cover of the latest edition of the Time magazine, Doctor. To have her, this is
Just like, it makes you very emotional. She is just so incredible, so incredible. And so Swati has spoken with her before.
That's
and
the cover of the Time magazine.
That's her on the cover of Time. Wow. That is something. What a
In fact, at this
human
moment,
being.
we are also joined in by Craig Foster and Pippa Ehrlich. Pardon my not knowing. Pardon my ignorance. Oscar-winning producer, Oscar-winning director of My Octopus Teacher, founder of the Sea Change Project. Thank you very much. What an honor to have you with us right here. Pippa, I want to begin with you. If I can start, your film, My Octopus Teacher, has brought the attention of millions to the oceans. For the longest time, there has been a terrestrial bias. Forests on land have been seen as the most important ecosystem to mitigate climate change. But ocean is the key.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Thank you very much for having us. I think there is a misconception that places like the Amazon are our most important resource when it comes to balancing the kind of carbon dioxide oxygen balance on our planet. But actually, every second breath we take comes directly from our ocean. And our oceans are filled with different habitats and environments that are able to take carbon out of the atmosphere. And kelp forests are one of the least understood and most important resources we have when it comes to carbon emissions. I think what many people don't know is that 25% of Earth's coastline is covered by kelp forests. So there are these massive swathes of underwater forest all over our planet, as far south as Antarctica, and as far north as Alaska. And not only are these an incredible resource for carbon sequestration, kelp forests protect our coastlines from erosion, which is especially important in a time of rising sea levels. And they are also just these incredible kind of almost safety deposit banks for biodiversity. The amount of species and also the abundance of animals that you find in a kelp forest is utterly staggering. And it's an environment that actually has not been that well explored or documented in natural history storytelling around the world. So They are, just underwater wonderland, exquisitely beautiful places that we need to protect and still have so much to learn about. And what we do at the Sea Change Project, which is an organization that Craig and I are part of, is we are dedicated firstly to ensuring protection for the Great African Sea Forest, which is the place that the octopus teacher lived and the place that we dive and explore every day. But we're expanding that story now to include kelp forests all over the world, because in the time of climate change, these habitats are the second most vulnerable marine habitat when it comes to climate change.
This is a question for Craig Foster. So, what according to you is the greatest threat that we face?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you, Mr. Bachchan. In my mind, the greatest threat to this planet is the cooling of the human heart towards nature. And I think we've forgotten that this extraordinary biodiversity, this giant biological intelligence in the ocean and on the land, is literally keeping us alive from second to second. It's the immune system of the planet. And somehow in our busy lives and the strange times, we've disconnected from this. We think that other things are more important, but the foundation of every single thing we do, every step we take, every mouthful of food, every breath of air, is all thanks to this great Mother Nature that's keeping us alive and has kept us alive since the beginning of time. So it's really time now to acknowledge that and start seriously regenerating this great mother that really is our mother, that's birthed us and has looked after us for millennia.
Craig, hi, Pranoy here. It's just lovely to see you.
Wonderful to see you too, Pranoy.
You are getting a bit emotional.
Okay. So in the film you speak of nature healing, your cold water adaptation or adaptation, and also just being in the water. Can you speak to how nature is a powerful healer, physical and mental?
Yes. I think that we've been designed over 300,000 years to live in wild nature. It's our home. It's what every child that's born is expecting, to actually be born into wild nature, and we come into this strange world. So when we reconnect with her, it wakes something up, and we remember who we are. And especially from my side, the cold water, I find the cold, after long periods of going in every day, one's whole immune system starts to change and becomes much stronger. This little cold pressure every day builds that immune system in a way that's quite remarkable. And of course, then you start having relationships with nature again. This is something we've had again from the beginning of time, relationships with all sorts of animals, and that nurtures the mind, nurtures the soul. So it's a whole host of things. The feeling of being in a forest or in an underwater environment sends all sorts of feel-good chemicals to the brain. So one feels boosted by that, and months and weeks of doing that, your whole sense of self, sense of well-being changes. It's a tremendous difference. Living closer to nature or living apart from her.
Pippa?
Just about recovered. I just
felt very emotional because I was so happy that you won the Oscar just 3 or 4 of you, what did it mean to you? I feel actually you've changed my life more than anybody else.
Thank you, Pranay. To hear that from someone like you is obviously a huge boost for us. It's hard to say what it means to you. I think when you pour your heart and soul into creating something that you very much care about, and a story that is deeply, deeply close to your own heart, it can be quite a scary thing to do. And you put it out into the world on a platform like Netflix, and suddenly it's accessible to, hundreds of millions of people all around the world, and it resonates with them, and you receive hundreds of thousands of messages and emails from people all over the world saying that it's had a positive impact on them, and it's made them think differently about how human beings relate to nature, and it's made them think differently about animal sentience. And I think from a storyteller's point of view, that's kind of an absolute dream scenario. What more can you ask for than to feel like you've
and the fact that your dream has come true. You're going to save the kelp forests as a result of this. 7 years.
It's enormously powerful, and I think it's also, I've been an environmental journalist for pretty much all of my adult life, and much of the stories that we tell as environmental journalists are not positive. They're about stories of, destruction and despair. So to have the opportunity to tell a story about a positive relationship between people and nature, I think it goes beyond just kelp forests. And I think we live in a time where most young people that you speak to are afraid of the future. And to be able to tell a story about hope and about a different way of relating to the natural world, that was an enormous privilege for me.
Amitabh, I've spent so many hours swimming in the kelp forest with Craig and learned so much.
Oh, wonderful.
And Craig has only been swimming since he was, I think, 6 days old. Roughly. And, he's one with the ocean completely. 7 years of swimming and filming, and this happened.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Craig, let me ask you this question. Your reference to indigenous wisdoms, how important is this? And why do you always refer, Swati was also talking about it earlier in the day, of biodiversity being the immune system of the planet?
We're just struggling, just so you know, we're struggling to hear you, so I only heard a part of that question, so I'll try to answer it.
Let me repeat the question
I was
for you.
very fortunate in a large part of my sort of 20s, 30s and early 40s to work in many African countries and in the famous Kalahari area. And I was fortunate enough to work with the San master trackers in this environment, and they taught me so much about tracking animals and details in nature that at first seemed almost impossible to understand. So I've learned so much from many different indigenous people in Africa through filmmaking and through studying, and then I've taken those ideas and tried to formulate an underwater tracking system in the kelp forest. And at first it was very difficult. In the first year I found almost nothing, and then suddenly all these tracks and these tiny signs started to emerge, and I was able to predict animals' behavior, and I could see what animals were doing from the previous night. And this, so this indigenous wisdom, almost like indigenous science, and is so critical, I think, for us as we move forward, because these people understand nature from a holistic sense. They understand animals in a very deep and resonant way, and I think when you combine indigenous wisdom and science together, it's very, very powerful way of finding a way forward with all these massive challenges we face in the world today. And I mean, you ask about the immune system of the planet. Biodiversity, well, that's all the animals and plants on this planet. That's the thing that's actually keeping us alive. If you take out even all the insects, this whole world will collapse and we won't be able to breathe because the plants won't be able to pollinate. So if you take out this biodiversity, our whole living system collapses and we will not survive as a species. I think that's what we've forgotten, and it's so critical that every child knows this, and that these animals are literally, and plants are keeping us alive from second to second.
When Amitabh Bachchan asked you something, you said, and Radhika wants you to repeat that and elaborate on it, when you said the cooling of the human heart. Could you just say that again and what you meant?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Pranay. So this thing about this cooling of the human heart towards nature, it's this terrifying thing where humans have been disconnected from the natural system, from our original mother. And our whole, our bodies, our minds, our spirits are shriveling in that cooling. And it's what's so critical is that we have this change of heart, that we start to love the natural system again, to love these animals, these creatures, these plants that keep us alive. It's a critical thing, and we've had this reciprocity with nature, deep reciprocity from the beginning of time. All indigenous cultures have this tremendous reciprocity, understanding, and love of nature. They would not be able to understand this idea of this cooling of the heart towards this wild mother. It would be unthinkable. So it's quite critical now that we start to, as I say, have a change of heart and move towards all our actions thinking of that great mother that's keeping us alive. What are we going to do? What are we going to do to regenerate her? How are we going to nurture her? How are we going to help her? Because she is our everything. There's every single thing we do, every political, every financial decision, every social decision is all sitting on that massive ecological foundation that is the biodiversity of this planet.
Very powerful message. Thank you so much, Craig and Pippa. You know, one thing that can help is more stories like The Octopus Teacher. A mix of emotions as well as science, which can maybe convince more people of that powerful message that you seek to deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'd just like to say that I'm in the water now every day myself, in the cold water, swimming and diving, and I nearly drowned as a child, and I was terrified of the ocean, but because of Craig and Pippa and everyone, now I swim every single day in the ocean, so I'm like missing it being here. But we're joined by some other wonderful guests to talk more about why the environment is the foundation of everything that we do. We have Manisha Maiskar, Principal Secretary, Government of Maharashtra. We have Abhishek Chaudhary, Member One Health, high-level expert panel. We have Pinaki Ranjan Mishra, Consumer Leader and Market Segment Leader, Ernst & Young. We have Saurabh Malhotra, Co-founder, Balipada Foundation. Ravi is back with us here to speak more about the environment and Reckitt's commitments. And we have Ravi Singh as well here with us, CEO WWF. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ravi Singh. Basically, the IPCC report has alerted a code red. We don't even call it so we've reached a stage of, it says code red for humanity. The WWF did a Living Planet report, and it's warned us of the 6th mass extinction. And we need to stop seeing the problem only through the lens of carbon emissions, am I right? It needs to be seen as a holistic thing, which is biodiversity, carbon, planet, all of it as one big whole.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me. You know, this is a very big question. It's a monumental question. You have to spend a fair amount of time. I'd like to say that if you look at it holistically, we need to act with certain amount of speed and some amount of direction in terms of objective. So increased conservation efforts are an order of the day. You've seen the Living Planet report of WWF. We've recorded 68% decline in species or wildlife populations since 1970. And the majority of these have declined in wetlands and areas where we have fresh water. Now, if this is any indicator, the human species is very close to having seen this kind of threat. So there is need for speed in action, increased conservation and protection efforts. We need to consume more sustainably, we need to produce more sustainably. And if there is a message in this, it is that we cannot hold all actions only for our government, which is doing what they can and doing more than others. We should hold it to our own institutions and individuals like ourselves and our municipalities and our communities to which we belong. So if that is a direction that we need to take, we must look to it. Also, Swati, think about other things like, you know, there are these small guys who run the earth, insects, pollinators, bees. Bee colonies are crashing, wild bee colonies particularly. Pollinators are disappearing across the world, including in our country to a large extent. And just some action can make a big difference in all this. And looking at forest and wetland restoration, protection of these, getting people involved in understanding what these wetlands are and really looking at them not just as carbon storage and energy and other things, but something that our civilization, our country, our heritage is good for. And therefore going for something which is resilient both for society and our culture and for our country.
Yeah.
Have I answered you? I hope in a way. Right. Long-winded.
You've given us a lot to think about, certainly, yes. That's for sure.
I just wanted to ask Manisha ji, you know, Mumbai is prioritizing climate change in a very big way. Many conferences, many meetings have been held, and both the governments are very keenly looking at it. Coastal erosion is one of the very major problems that all coastal regions face, but Mumbai in particular is. How are you going about it to prevent this?
As soon as the IPCC report was out, we made a presentation to the cabinet. And I am very happy to say that the cabinet is realizing three things. One is that climate change is real. It is no longer debatable, it is real. Second is that climate change is here. And third is that the time to act is now. And our minister, in fact, is fond of saying that this is the last decade when anything meaningful could be done about climate change. Really? So what Maharashtra has in fact done is that it has established a highest level council, which we call the MCCC, which is the Maharashtra Council for Climate Change. It is going to be chaired by the Chief Minister himself, and all the departments, there are about 5 sectors which need to act and act immediately if we are thinking of a carbon neutral future. I think ultimately it's about a carbon neutral future. So the first is that we need to think about decarbonizing our power, depend less on thermal power, think more about solar power. So it's the energy department that's going to present their plan for a carbon neutral future to the Chief Minister and this council, MCCC. We need to make our transport electric, shared, non-motorized. That is why Maharashtra also has a very comprehensive EV policy. We have all read about it. We need to make our cities livable. We have been talking about it for a long time, but we really need to make that push to make our cities livable. We need to make our industry sustainable in a circular economy kind of a way, and our agriculture sustainable. So I think it's a very, very heartening step that Maharashtra has formed the MCCC. But Jane earlier in the program mentioned that the real hope is the youth, and therefore we are also introducing a syllabus in the primary and the secondary school, possibly from the next year onwards.
Excellent.
We call it the Maji Vasundhara syllabus, which is going to talk a lot about Mother Earth. It is going to talk about connecting with nature, bonding with nature. So that's, I think, another step. And we have launched a campaign called the Maji Vasundhara campaign, which is the My Earth campaign. So overall, I think there is going to be a lot of climate action in Maharashtra in the days to come.
When we talk about this massive coastal road that's going to be built, would it affect corrosion?
This is a question, I think, which will always have advocates on both sides. But the coastal road, when it was being cleared, India has a system of environmental clearances. So the coastal road, while it was cleared environmentally, there are a lot of best practices that the makers of coastal road are being asked to set up. So I think ultimately the way the coastal road is being planned, it is being planned in such a way so as to disrupt environment in the least. It is going to disrupt environment, certainly, but it's going to, but all these practices that the makers will have to put it in place, I think the turbulence is going to be the least possible turbulence.
Right.
It's wonderful to hear this, that the focus is so much, and you have, as you said, this is the last chance we have.
Yes.
In this
And
decade,
in this decade, and you're really working on that.
Yes, so quite a bit. In fact, Maharashtra is aiming to have whatever policy it adopts, just as every policy that a state takes up has its vetting done from the finance, we all know too well. So Maharashtra also, in fact, is thinking in terms of, it's not still in place, but the thought process is on as to whether any new policy or any new project which comes into being needs to be vetted from the environmental angle as well.
I think that's so key, because I think the fundamental thing which we hadn't understood for the longest time, and now we sort of understand, is something that is not ecological is not economical. It just, the two things, like you cannot have something that's not ecological making any kind of economic sense, because it might give you quick short-term return of profit, but down the line the damage is going to be so extensive that whatever it is that you gain, you're going to lose.
Yes, and
it's much in line with what we've been talking throughout the day, that the economy of health is dependent upon the economy of the environment.
Exactly, exactly.
What are we going to be doing?
And I think also what needs to be kind of driven home is that economy and environment are not adversarial.
Exactly.
They have to be in sync with each other, because that is the only future that everybody is talking about. That is the only sustainable future. Because otherwise the future looks a bit alarming.
Yeah, it does. It does. I'd like to ask a question to Abhishek Chaudhary. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a bit of a trade-off question. So with so many challenges facing us, positive, negative trade-offs, how does one manage to progress on the one thing we need, sustainable growth?
So that's one of the biggest challenge of academia in 21st century, in my view, both at the primary and the university level.
Right.
I would like to give you one example. When I teach, I'm also professor at IIT Kanpur, so people ask, what if some insect is dying? Who cares? How will it impact me? So I give them this example of vulture crisis in India. So in 1990s, the veterinary doctors in India, they started to give diclofenac injections to cattle, so to cow and buffaloes. And when these cattle were dying, in India, we put them in outside the village where the vulture comes and eat them, and they dispose. So they are the natural scavengers. But due to this chemical diclofenac, they used to have kidney failure, and India lost 95% of its vulture population. Now, what happened is that because the vultures were gone, we had increase in population of dogs and rats, and these are vector carriers. So India started to see increase in rabies cases, and the rabies vaccination is also very expensive. So we, at the national level, Indian government had to pay a lot of economic damages due to this problem. And the funny thing, or kind of how it impacts our culture and society, is that, as you know, the Parsi people, they don't bury, they don't cremate their dead bodies. They put it on a hill, and the vulture comes and eats the dead body. So they started to have a crisis because the vultures were gone and nobody was eating their dead bodies. So you see how one small chemical which humans introduced, how it cascades into economic, social, cultural problems. So there are trade-offs. So for example, we are having in India, rice and wheat are our staples. So they are very environmentally intensive crops. They use a lot of water, fertilizer, pesticides. So what we are saying is that there is a trade-off between Indian food security and environmental development. So why don't we focus on, let's say, the coarse grains like maize, millet, which use less water, which can, which use less fertilizer. But here the problem is their yield is very low. So the farmers, there is a problem of farmers' profit. That's where the government needs to step in and make sure that to incentivize the both consumption and production of such crops. So the problem here is that we need to train, we need to young generation to come up and take up this sustainable development as their profession. So we have one of the best brains, IITians in India. They're contributing a lot to software, but we need to also nudge them to enter this sector.
Right. No, absolutely. There is so much that we need to do to get to be sustainable. I just have a question for Saurav Malhotra. You're doing amazing work in the Northeast, in biodiversity protection and restoration, and this is the UN Decade of Restoration. Can you tell us about that, as the Northeast is a biodiversity hotspot in this country? I mean, we have World Heritage Sites there, we have the, biodiversity hotspots there. It's a very, very unique part when it comes to our environment and nature.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you, Swati, for the question. So the Northeast, in fact, I'd like to talk about the Northeast in the larger context of the region, which is the Eastern Himalayas. Yeah. So the region really, it connects two of the world's most populous, but also biologically and culturally diverse nations, right? India and China. And the region, in turn, becomes an ecological bridge for about 250 million people from over 400 different indigenous ethnic groups. So the strategic value of this region really cannot be understated. So from its centrality as a water source to its importance as a convergence of two global biodiversity hotspots. And fortunately, the region, like you mentioned, is endowed with very rich natural capital. And most of this natural capital and biodiversity is largely untapped, but also, unfortunately, under leveraged and is viewed really as an impediment to our economic growth. And it often becomes a battleground for many of the increasingly endangered species like the Asian elephant or the one-horned rhinoceros and even the Royal Bengal tiger. For me and for us at the Balipara Foundation that was founded in 2007 by Ranjit Thakur, one of the prime challenges of the region is that we are losing our forests at an unprecedented pace. In the last 20 years, we've lost 10% of our green cover, which for the region equals the size of the entire country of Bhutan and the entire state of Sikkim. And that in a region where about 80% of the entirety of the population is dependent on agriculture or other forms of livelihoods directly linked to nature is a disaster. So this long-term ecological degradation and loss of our biodiversity is actually the cause for many of the current challenges that we face, including floods and erosion, and threaten livelihoods. We also see biodiversity loss having great impacts on the way humans are migrating out of the area as well. So we are a biodiversity hotspot, but because of the huge amounts of deforestation, I think there's massive challenges because of that.
Ravi, we've been talking about the Northeast. What are the kind of initiatives that you're supporting in the Northeast?
So we have a very huge program in Northeast where we work with the school kids. We cover around 3 million school kids, but the topic is very different. The topic was adolescent sexual reproductive health. So I happened to meet Saurabh in one of the meetings. So I was taking some sessions in the school and he was also talking, and he was saying all the water which is flowing from the Himalayas is actually going back to the sea. And there is no way that water can be used, conserved, and the fresh water is mixing into the sea water. Then second thing he said, come with me, let me show you new Kaziranga. I said, okay, let's go and see. So very few cubs left of single horned rhinoceros. Very few trees now. It's my recent visit, sir, 6 months back. So I asked him what we can do together. He said, it's great, you take a small pilot, we put something together, we do something which will also be on the lines of one health, one planet, one future. All those discussions were happening. But in the meanwhile, then we also thought it's very important to understand and go deep into the problem, what's happening in the Northeast. So we engaged Ernst & Young to work with us on creating something which is the Climate Resilience Index. We had the Hygiene Index, sir, which you launched with us 4 seasons back. In the same way, we have worked on this Climate Resilience Index. We have various parameters on which we are actually measuring what all the recommendations which we can give to the state governments. What's the role of the communities? What's the role of the indigenous tribes? What's the role of the church? What's the role of alternative government systems which may be there in the Northeast? Even the systems which are there with the government. And very big influencer group is the kids. We are investing in the future. So let's take our Climate Resilience Index report in such a way to the school kids so that we can show to them the actions what they can take, and there should be call to action. It should not be just a research. So this whole research, so Pinaki, who is a senior partner with EY, he and his colleague have met, 2 leaderships in 2 various states, one is Sikkim and second is Assam. People are very intrigued, no one has come before to us talking about the Climate Resilience Index, what this index is all about. We have talked about the Swachhta Sarvekshan. So this is something, sir, which we are focusing a lot, and it's not just on the surface in terms of trees or plants or animals. We are going below the surface also. So what's happening in the Brahmaputra region, what's happening underneath that, and what are the recommendations which we will be getting. Sir, nowadays subjects are very fancy, talking about Ganges or Amazon. Everyone has started talking about it. But what's the call to action? A person who is sitting in a town in Delhi or in Bombay asks, okay, what I can do for this? So the question is that it's not only you talk about the sustainable clothing or other things. So it's not just recycling, it's upcycling also. And a lot of partnerships are actually, coming together with like-minded people. We reached out to the WWF, sir. We talked to them about Ganges. So what we can do with the Ghadial, what we can do for the dolphins, what we can do for, the water atlas in the Ganges region. In the same way with the Balipara, what we can do for this, 7 northeastern states. Can we not have a leadership competition between the various state governments so that there is a leadership charter, leadership board where you show them the results and show them the pathway and help them to use their funds which are available. We also have certain amounts which are earmarked under our CSR funding. So this is a new door which we have opened from this year to start working on. And then very interestingly, sir, with EY, they bring global experience. When we started discussing, we didn't saw it just from the India lens. We saw it how alarming it is, because if you remember, sir, we have together did some work on Punjab stubble burning. What happened to the stubble burning? We planted around 2 million trees across India. So what next? These solutions are also good, but it needs more of the sustainable solution and an approach where you put the roadmaps where there are some definite timelines, because commitment is very much important, and it should be public-private, partnership, where it's not just the responsibility of the government, it is equal responsibility of the companies who produce, plastics, who produce those things with, but good thing is, like with this government, a lot of things are changing, sir. Like the issues regarding the, MLP, the multi-layer plastics, the suggestions by Mr. Gadkari, like making the roads from the plastic and, all the residuals. Even nowadays I see, NIDs and other places, they also participate in the fashion shows, where they are not talking about, changing the clothing every 2 months or 3 months like Zara's of the world and MS's, Marks and Spencer's of the world. They're also going into the upscaling and, other things, like world is evolving. And we want our 3 million school kids in the Northeast become the champion. They go, they talk, they take informed action. And future-wise, we are also like, we are able to excite these 10,000 kids with the Whitehead Junior this year on the hygiene. So the next big competition will be on ecological well-being and the one world, one health, where these kids from the Whitehead Junior, they will be made doing the coding so that it gets embedded in them, because that's also the neuro-linguistic programming, how it works. Some kids want to experience, make it, feel it, talk about it. So we want to make the champions.
Because you mentioned the Climate Resilience Index, I want to ask Mr. Mishra, now, what is, you've been doing this whole thing. What are some of the sort of startling facts, if I may ask? Like anything that people will be really surprised by that you've looked at that's come out so far?
I think we are now we are actually developing the index now, and I think the logic for choosing Northeast was quite obvious. It's more than 80% of biodiversity hotspots are in the Northeast region, and that's the reason we thought we'll start there. I think what's happening is vulnerability has two parts. One, of course, is what's happening on the globe, which you can't do much locally, but there's a lot that you can do locally, and what we are calling as adaptability. So if you are vulnerable, what are you doing at adaptability, and what is the balance is resilience. So if I am able to do adapt well, then probably I'll be more resilient. So the whole concept is that. And I think one of the startling facts when we met people in Nagaland and Sikkim was that over a period of time we have completely ignored the ways in which they have been, for example, doing cultivation, and we have said that these are not the right ways, which is completely incorrect. Or for example, things, how do we manage the forest? I think a lot of things over a period. See, we need to have tourism, we need to build more roads, but how do we balance this out with the whole ecological factor? And as Madam mentioned, we need the road, we can't say we don't need it. But how do you maintain the balance, and how do we use the local people to, have them engaged and maintain the balance?
Relatively worrying developments, but it might be managed well. It hasn't happened yet, but palm oil is coming into the Northeast, for example. That worries me deeply, because I have seen the legacy of palm oil in Borneo and what they've done to orangutans, decimated 90% of orangutan populations and decimated over 85% of virgin forests. So that's very worrying.
So absolutely. In fact, they are seeing pests and insects which they have they have never seen 10 years back. So there is a migration of animals. So all of these are big challenges, I guess. So hopefully this index will help identify what needs to be done by these states.
Nisha, what you were saying earlier made so much sense, and it really seems that you're going to make a difference. But again, this issue of the trade-offs, how are you going to tackle that? Because you'll have opposition, you'll have, all sides. It's going to be, it's the most important task and probably the most difficult.
You are so right. But earlier on, I think there were many skeptics. Maybe a few years back, when you talk of climate change, it seems so remote. It seems somewhere happening in Antarctica, that people didn't really connect with it. But I think this IPCC report is so startling. And also what has happened in Maharashtra is that, I remember when we were all in school, we learnt in geography that our west coast was the safest from point of view of cyclones. West coast had never had a cyclone in the earlier 200 years. And now we have 3 cyclones in 2 years. We have very high extreme rainfall events. We have landslides. So I think what has happened in the past few years is that the climate change has come home so as to say. So everybody has kind of, woken up and they think that it's real. So I feel that people are sitting up and listening when we talk about it. But there's also the MCCC that I mentioned.
Yes.
Another difficult thing a few years back was because see, the environment department is so-called responsible for good environment, but it's all the other departments who have to do their work to achieve a carbon neutral future. So now we have a council chaired by the Chief Minister in which all the relevant ministers are there. That's also going to help.
So that will make faster decisions.
I think so. And this council, it was also, in fact, I was also a little doubtful as to what kind of attention the cabinet would pay to this IPCC report. But I must say that the presentation went on for about 30 minutes. They listened to it with rapt attention, the classical pin drop silence kind of a rapt attention. And at the end of it, they said that we will meet once a month to take this whole thing forward. So there are going to be basically 3 verticals I think all of you have been talking about. The first is to see that the emissions come down. The greenhouse gas emissions come down.
Keep measuring that.
Come down by all this less reliance on thermal power, more electric vehicles and so on. The second is to, lot was mentioned about preserving our forest, preserving biodiversity. Biodiversity is such a key. Mangroves are so important.
Right.
So the second vertical is to see that whatever are the carbon absorption elements in nature, they have to be firstly conserved and secondly strengthened.
Right.
But we also realize that ultimately it's upon all of us. And
You
our
see,
chief,
I have one suggestion.
Yes.
Someone who can really get this done and is sitting quite near me. He's got other things done like polio and I gave it away.
I think I'm really going to make a request at this stage.
Get him to work for once in his life.
I'm really going to make an earnest request for Mr. Bachchan to join our
team. He says he'd love to help. That's a big. Sorry, carry on.
Anything for state and country, that's fine. I'd love to do that, yeah.
If I can I was hesitant because I didn't want to use this platform to request Mr. Bachchan to really team up with us to work on climate action.
No, anytime. Just let me have your notes as to what is to be done, in which manner we can make a campaign.
Certainly.
Just having Mr. Bachchan tweet a few things. So you have such a huge following, and you do such good tweeting and people really listen to you.
Sometimes the tweet is not taken as seriously as it should be. But if you were to design a campaign,
yes, sir,
through one of your government agencies, or I'd be more than happy to,
Sir, I remember in Swachh Bharat, you said about mere 2 gaz. Don't really bother about the world. Just take care of your 2 yards or 10 yards. So actually, we also have an e-pledge. So don't think really about the Amazon or the Antarctica. Just introduce one green lifestyle change in your lives. So, sir, if you could kind of become the patron of that each person takes a green pledge.
Patron is the wrong word, really, but if I could be, if I could be part of a whole group or a team that can design a campaign, and I'd be more than happy to.
We would be also, sir, so much happy to have you with us.
And anytime, don't feel that this platform is the wrong place. Yeah, all right. So I have a question for Mr. Ravi Singh. Mr. Ravi Singh, you have been in the field for decades, and can you tell us why biodiversity restoration is important, not just for climate change, but to improve human health?
Well, for an Indian, it means protection of our cultural and historic heritage. For an Indian, it means it's a conservation of your country. Biodiversity taken together, if we had respected it, we would not have had the pandemics that we are witnessing at this point of time. Biodiversity, if respected, would also give us the products and produces and the services that we require for our well-being and for our future. And it's a universe, depending on where you are. If you are in Mumbai, you can learn a lot from the habitat that is there. I'm in Bharatpur at this point of time, and every area here, including the sanctuary of Bharatpur, Ghana, is a laboratory of learning. And biodiversity is actually a universe of knowledge. And with that knowledge, if we understand it with certain amount of seriously, we can go ahead for action, and the action that you are talking about at this point of time to prevent all the issues to come for us. And I'd just like to finish at one point, that the importance of biodiversity is probably understood in India much better than other parts of the world, because it's part of our culture, our heritage, our history, our religion, and everything that we know about this. It's a very difficult concept to understand if you're teaching it as a theory. But in terms of practice, everywhere in India, people know of it, they respect it, and in many ways they practice it. So actually, against climate change, we have a great protector, we have a great pillar and a great mitigator, which is the Indian people and the great knowledge that they have to make things change. I hope I've answered you well, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed.